Your plans are stupid and your engineer is an idiot.
You got homeowners prowling through all day and they don't understand construction and they're asking questions.
Looking great, dude. And by the way, it's a requirement. If you buy one of our kits, you have to be in this just beautiful scenic spot. Shh, you didn't hear that from me.
As we kind of lean into this a little bit more between the differences, right? So everybody knows the differences between us. Like, you know, you're selling kits to people to construct, and you know we're offering the construction of, right? What was really funny is before we even started this, you and I were in here chatting, and you said that you work kind of like the customer service department. And out of all the tech support is what it was. Yeah. You're like, out of all the tech support things that come in, 90% of them are who?
Well, so some background. So we do hundreds and hundreds of buildings a year, and over half of them are built by DIYers. And we have a fair chunk of people that hire building erectors to put up their building shells. The true DIYer, they frankly, almost without exception, they do a really great job. And they do a great job for several reasons. They have no preconceived notion of wrong. They're willing to look at their plans, and they will follow directions. I mean, we give them a book that's almost 600 pages long now. And it started off, I told you 40 years ago, they got a few notebook pages. And when the business started 22 years ago, our construction manual was about 17 pages. And my then wife, who was my business partner, she goes, and people can build things with this? Oh, yeah, they can build things. She goes, no, people can't build things like that. I mean, and when we got started, she was an RN by trade, and she learned to AutoCAD draft our plans. And we went around and around and around on why a 2x6 is only 1.5 inches by 5.5 inches. She goes, I'm an RN. I can't give somebody about 30 cc's of medicine. You know, if the doctor says 30 cc's, I can't give them 20 and tell them it's because we made the piece smaller. It doesn't work that way. Okay, well, we got through that eventually, but so I said, okay, so I'll give you a section. You tell me everything in there that doesn't make sense, and we'll expand it. So 17 pages became about 50, became about 100, became about 200. And I mean, every time a customer called with a question that wasn't in the directions, it got added to the directions, so that the next time I could say, go to chapter 43 and look at figure 17, and there it is. So the DIYers, they follow the directions. That, you know, here's what you do. Just go ding, ding, ding down the line. You're happy. I hardly hear from any of them. They send me pictures. You know, looking great, dude. And by the way, it's a requirement. If you buy one of our kits, you have to be in this just beautiful scenic spot. Yeah. Because God, they send some it's like, whoa, did you like, Photoshop in the background of these beautiful snow-covered mountains, or this great view of a lake? I don't know how they managed to do that, but it sure makes our buildings look nice. I know it. But the great majority of our technical support is done for building erectors that are supposedly professionals. I mean, you are paying them your hard-earned money to come and put up this building. And the conversations generally start off with, your plans are stupid and your engineer is an idiot. And my response is, okay, now that we're past that, tell me what your challenge is, and we'll figure out how to solve it. And most of them are solvable, other than, you built the building 6 inches taller than the plans. How could that possibly be a problem? So, there's even solves for that. Or, the guy that put his entry door posts outside the building line for some reason, and then wondered how he was supposed to get them back inside the building.
I can't imagine those phone calls, because just within our own company, job to job, the conversations, and we use Slack internally, and so like
we're slackers too,
and everything's just like beep, 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 beep. I have to remove myself from conversations because I'm like, this is the most overwhelming thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, there's just so much happening, right? And in the world that we're in, like a good portion, I don't know if it's a majority, but a good portion of the people we're building for live on site in some degree. They're either in a travel trailer or they're in a home over here and they're building another home. And so you got homeowners prowling through all day and they don't understand construction and they're asking questions. But let me ask you this. If there's one thing that just pisses you off in the industry, right? Like it drives you absolutely insane because it's something that you see all the time. And you're like, if I could just take a magic wand and fix one thing, what do you think that would be?
I would fix clients who do not thoroughly vet out the morons they hire to put up their buildings. And they're not all morons. I mean, there are some exceptions to that rule. There's some really great building erectors, but for the most part, they're morons. And people, they hire Chuck in the truck, and then they wonder why it doesn't turn out the way, or they wonder why Chuck built a quarter of their building and got paid for 3/4 of it, and they can't find Chuck.
Yeah,
I mean those things. Oh, my heart breaks for the stories that I hear of people they hired somebody and they didn't check to see if he has a license or it doesn't have insurance or my big one is if they can't put up a performance bond. Performance bonds are cheap, by the way. I mean, they're not expensive. They'll cost 1% to 2% of the value of the contract, but the guy has to be financially stable in order to put one up. He has to own a house or have some assets. If they can't put up a performance bond, you really want to give that guy a whole pile of money? And yet they do it. They don't check references. And there's some real flakes. I mean, one of them, when I was a builder, I had a guy that was a subcontractor for us, and he built good buildings, and so then he went off on his own. And about a year later, he comes to us and he wants to buy a set of trusses and a bunch of 2x6s for purlins for a building he's going to put up. And so it's like $7,000, and he writes us a check for it and goes and puts up the building. His check took a couple of weeks to bounce, and so in the meantime, he gets the building up, and I mean, it's really late in the year, and it snows, and the building falls down. Well, the trusses that were designed for 12-foot snares, he put them every 14. And fortunately, we had a picture that the end user had taken of the building, where you could see the roof purlins sagging about 6 inches in between the trusses because they were only designed to span 12 feet, and 14 feet is not quite the same. Well, turns out that not only did he write us a bum check, but his contractor's license had expired, and his insurance had expired, and his bond had expired, and he had no assets. And building owner didn't bother to insure the building. And so you know who got sued because they had insurance? We did. And we as in our insurance company, because the judge ruled we were 2% at fault because we had supplied materials, our insurance 2%. Company paid for a new building. Wow. I know, just astounding. But I mean, same issues. If you're gonna hire a building erector, vet them out. Go to handsonpolebuildings.com, and in the little search term in the upper right, type in contractor vetting. There's a nice little sheet there that you can look at, and it'll guide you through. These are the things that you want to have prove. And just because they give you a copy of their contractor's license, you better check with the state to make sure that they didn't forge it. Because I've had guys do it. That's
wild.
It is.
We deal
insane.
with the same things every single day with subs, and like we're building. We have subcontractors all over the thing, and one thing that for us, it's our responsibility. So we have this whole vetting back-end process and people in our office that handle all this all day, every day.
Yeah.
And they're looking at certificates of insurance versus this, workman's comp. But just it's insane, all the stuff that they're doing behind the scenes to make sure that whoever's showing up on your job is a legitimate contractor with the proper insurance and the proper forms. And I would say if there's, an advantage to, if you're DIY, you're DIY.
Yeah. But
if you're going to build, the be my own GC part, that scares me a little bit, because you broaden your ability to be scammed.
Oh yeah.
And get people that'll take deposits and leave and check out. The good thing about working with a builder is we're doing all that for you. It is a lot of people laugh and say it's babysitting. Well, it's way more than that, but it is, a lot of it is babysitting.
That's part of it.
But it's just an insurance for you as a consumer that this is done the right way. You've got levels of protection. You've got layers of insurance. You got, a licensed person that understands what's going on, and it just brings some value. But pushing back into post frame. So people hear us talk about this all the time, and I'm guilty of just throwing the term around, and they don't know what the heck that means. So in Barndominium world, we've talked a little bit about blow-away carports and stuff, and how that's not a viable solution. But in Barndominiums, and we even joked about people getting on there making comments like, "That don't even look like a Barndominium," and what is a Barndominium? And I don't. There's not a clear definition. It's a style of home now. There used to be a specific thing that made that a term, right?
And originally it started from, I suppose, if you were going to get the true essence of barndominium, it's that you took a true barn of some sort and you converted it into a home.
That's correct.
Well, the reality is there's only so many old barns.
Yeah.
And pretty soon the old barns either fell down or they've been converted or they're still being used as barns.
That's right.
So you got to start from scratch now. So I don't care if it makes people feel good to call something a barndominium. More power to them. To me, basically, is you're building a building that's probably steel roofed and steel sided, but maybe not. We do all kinds of things. It's
same.
We provided a building to a gal that lives on Lake Havasu. Now, I had no real idea until we got a progress photo that this is a lakefront house in the middle of a neighborhood of lakefront houses. Her neighbors are 10 feet away from her, and she's putting up a post-frame home, and it doesn't have steel roofing or steel siding. It is stuccoed and has a tile roof. If she wants to,
that leans into the advantages of what we do.
Oh yeah,
because we have the same thing. We have people come to us all the time. One of the most asked questions that we get is, how do I know that I can build this in my municipality? I'm like, well, you got electricity and running water, because that's step one. But we can conform to almost all CCRs like that. People don't. Most of your restrictive covenants and things like that are not pertaining to how it's built, apart from block and things, but it's more of the materials used. And so one of the things that we do, and again, this is one of those things where we don't build buildings. The only thing we build is residential units.
Yeah. So
we're not building garages. We're not building, pole barns. We could, we just have no desire to. Our mission is barndominiums, residential live-in barndominiums. Yep. We don't put up anything else.
No, do it right. develop a system, which you have done.
And in doing that, we have to make accommodations to some of the things that we do. Like I like the GERT system and going metal to GERT and building that way. And that's how we did it until we encountered this issue or that issue, or we encountered someone needs to put a different type of siding on. Well, now I can't do that unless I sheet this home. And so we did the sheeting, right? And then we noticed when we were putting sheeting on homes, and it became more and more prevalent, and there's actually municipalities that require it. Now, whether or not that we could win that argument, I'm not sure, but it's easier for us to just say, okay. And, so we started having to sheet all of our roof decks and all of our siding and before we put on our metal. And so there was two reasons we did that. One was so we could use open cell spray foam without having to put any other kind of barrier in there. So we could go, instead of going straight to metal, we had wood there that we could spray that open cell to. The other side of that was so we could use various components. So we could put an asphalt shingle on one of our barn dominiums without changing anything other than just don't order the metal, order asphalt shingles.
Yep.
And siding. And then when we did that, we went from realizing like, hey, attaching OSB to this bookcase framing method that we did for 2.5 years, people don't understand it. And we're expanding into multiple states. So we started doing vertical framing members so that we're having to speak two different languages. Like what do trades know? What does the local municipality and inspectors know to where we can advance the project? Because we don't have the ability to fight that battle because we're the ones fighting it, right? Like we're literally there in every 300 something counties fighting inspectors. So we always make these changes, but you can't easily do that in a lot of these other applications. That's what I want to talk about. It's like in this Barndo world, and I know it applies to just buildings in general, but my audience is Barndo people. What are all the different, like, give pros and cons to different types of construction in this Barndo thing? And again, we're both coming at this from a perception of whatever makes you happy is great.
Yeah.
But the reason we chose to build the way we build, there's a reason behind it. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, and so let's look at some of the alternative options. So you've got what people call conventional, which would be stick frame. And they call it convention because, as we talked in the last episode, there's a cookbook for it.
Yep. And
the recipe book, at least for the International Residential Code, the IRC, is as long as you don't have a wall that's taller than 12 feet, as long as your trusses don't span more than 36 feet, your building's 60 feet or less in length, as opposed to width, and your roof slope's under 1212, and there's some limitations for snow load or wind load along with that. As long as you follow in that, hey, it's there. It's in the cookbook. Inspector comes out and he can look at his cookbook and he can say, yeah, you might meet the recipe, so you're all good. So it's simple, and there's fewer and fewer actual stick framers left in the world because there's so many places that factories are building walls, which I grew up as the son of a framing contractor. Good God, it's not that difficult, but
right.
Neither here nor there. I'll show you a story someday. We built a house for my neighbor over a weekend once.
That's awesome.
Without any permits. Shh, you didn't hear that from me. We're going to edit that out. You could leave it in. He's dead.
That's what the insurance is for.
Yeah. So you have the stick frame, but the stick frame does not lend itself quickly and easily to putting bare steel siding over framing members, because all the framing members go the wrong direction for vertical steel siding, vertical steel roofing. You have pre-engineered metal buildings. Pre-engineered metal buildings, or PEMBs, they're great buildings. If you need to clear span 120 feet, pre-engineered metal building, it's probably for you. You need a 30-foot tall wall without any intermediate floors, pre-engineered metal building, it might be for you. don't try building it yourself. All those pieces are really freaking heavy. I mean, you can't just go put up a pre-engineered metal building without having some serious equipment to move some real heavy pieces, because it just happens. And there are what appears to be some deals on pre-engineered metal buildings, until people really dig into why maybe it wasn't such a deal after all. Those advertised great prices sometimes have no walls. Sometimes the steel is bare galvanized or bare galvalume, which some people like that look. Rarely is there anything in that great price to control condensation. You've got wall framing that has horizontal girts every 7 feet, and roof purlins usually every 4 or 5 feet. And most people, they're do-it-yourselfers, are not comfortable with dealing with those kind of distances. So it takes a specialized kind of person to put one up and put it up right in most cases. You have to hire a foundation engineer, because those engineered plans from the pre-engineered metal building company don't have foundation designs, because they don't want the liability to begin with. But there's also huge differences in soil, and the loads in a pre-engineered metal building frame are a lot different than the loads in a post frame. Pre-engineered metal building frames, they want to kick out at the bottom of the frames, because typically they have fairly flat roofs. So you get the pre-engineered metal building up for your barndominium, and then you're standing inside and you're wondering, how am I going to finish this building? And generally, finishing that building means that you stick frame a house inside this building shell.
That's right.
So you've got a building inside a building. And our good friend John, I love John, and John does pre-engineered metal barndominiums. I think he does a great job at it. I'm not sure that that's the most cost-effective way to build a barndominium. There's lots of things to deal with there. You've got these huge steel frames that are going to appear every 20, 24 feet, and steel is a fabulous conductor of heat and cold. So now you have to figure out, how do you hide them, and how do you thermally break them so that you don't have this immense heat sink happening all over your building. Structurally, I think the pre-engineered metal building industry has done a pretty good job at structurally being on the up and up. Wasn't always that way. There were times when a lot of pre-engineered metal buildings fell to the ground. I think a lot of it because they did it just right to the gnat, as opposed to with wood. Like the numbers we use to engineer and design with wood is what they call 40% of P ultimate. And I didn't understand P ultimate until in the mid 80s. We wanted to see about building nail laminated columns as opposed to using a 6x6. So we were going to splice a treated bottom piece to an untreated upper piece and stagger our splices. And in our case, we put, this is like 20 gauge steel plate behind each of the splices. Well, we wanted to test them to make sure that the numbers we thought we were going to get out of them were really, what they were. So we took a unit of them down to the testing laboratory at Oregon State University, and they're loading these things and they're testing them to failure, which, it's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd never been involved in testing like that. One thing I can say is with nail laminated columns where they drive the nails in from both sides, the middle piece fails every time because it has twice as many nails in it. So anyhow, so we're testing all these things. And I'm looking at the numbers out of the testing results, and I'm going, wow, these things, they are incredibly strong. And the engineer that's running the testing, we're tabbing all the numbers, and he goes, okay, now take that number and use 40%. And I go, 40%? Why 40%? Because anything involving wood, the design values you can use can only be 40% of the fifth from the bottom out of 100 samples of that value. You can use 40% of it. I'm like, whoa, this isn't such a hot deal anymore. Well, the reasons for that is that the design values you use are lower than anything you're ever possibly going to get. It's that huge degree of safety in wood. And that's why when the storms of the century come through, that you don't have whole neighborhoods flat on the ground from wood failures. You have them flat on the ground from connection failures, but that was the fault of actually usually of lack of connectors or the wrong connectors. It wasn't the fault of the wood. The wood wasn't the weak link of the whole thing. So wood is good.
Well, to lean into that a little bit, another thing that we struggle with is engineering, and we not for us in our construction. We also have a division of our company that sells floor plans, right? People love, the floor plan. They see a picture posted and they're like, we want to build this. And, so we decided, hey, let's make these widely available. Yeah. And so we sell floor plans, and any builder that's worth the salt can use those plans to construct that house. Doesn't mean that the county isn't going to require some type of engineering. Again, we talked about this earlier was, not everywhere requires engineering. Matter of fact, most doesn't across the country. But where they do, there's a lot of things that go into this. And I think people have a misperception here or a misconception about what engineering is. And so they think, they hear the term engineered stamp. These are engineered stamp trusses. These are engineered stamp plans. And then you have the PEMBs that are like, these are pre-engineered metal buildings, and so they're engineered to withstand certain things. But when you're talking about building a home and you purchase a plan from us, we offer engineering services, right? But there's a lot of intake information that goes into that, and it's an additional expense. There's a lot of things that are factored into this type of engineering. Where are you building it? What materials are you using? Who's your builder? He may not build the way that we build. So for me to engineer it to my specifications would be crazy and a giant waste of your money, time, and resources. If you've hired a builder that doesn't build this way, or doesn't have the ability to build this way. And so we deal with that all the time. I think there's a huge just misunderstanding of what hearing engineer stamps are.
Yeah.
So like we have people that'll order and it's not everybody, out of thousands of plans that are sold, it's a handful that'll be like, well, these don't even have a stamp on them. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Elaborate a little bit more. So what we just talked about kind of lends itself to that. Like all these variables to engineering, wood versus steel versus, the bolt together red iron units versus weld up units versus stick built conventional style framing, which truly when they say stick built, it's not even stick built because they're pre-engineered trusses a lot of times. And, so like with all of this going on, elaborate a little bit more on engineering and what people's expectations should be when it comes to getting an engineered letter or an engineered approval for your particular municipality.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's start off with first of all with the floor plans, because we have an in-house drafting team and we do custom floor plans for people too. Now, floor plans that do not show the actual pieces of how it is put together and how the members are spaced and what all the connections are, and don't have snow loads and wind loads and seismic loads factored in. They're pretty pictures. They show where the rooms are. They give you the layout and the flow, and there's some guys that they'll do 3D, renditions for you, whatever. Those are non-structural. It is unlawful for an engineer to put their seal on a non-structural plan. It'd be like having an engineer take your toilet roll dispenser and have a picture of that toilet roll dispenser and stamp it.
Yeah.
Well, he can't do that. Or she can't do that. That is unlawful because that is outside of their scope. Now, an architect could seal those plans, but rarely. I mean, and I went to school to be an architect, so I'm not trying to shoot holes in people in the profession I started in, but rarely is an architect required by a jurisdiction to create a floor plan and elevation drawings for a building. It's a service. It is not the structural portion of it. The structural portion is a whole nother ballgame, and done right, it is very complex. Post-frame buildings, as simple as they may look, they are very complex structures. Even that little garage that you may build that's post-frame, it has thousands of components in it. A two-car garage, I can run you a set of our calculations out for that building, and chances are it's somewhere around 150 pages. But it covers everything. I mean, it covers the transferring of every load throughout that building. I had the first commercial building I built for myself was my truss plant in Spokane 30 some odd years ago. And as part of that, I had to have an engineered site plan. Now, I didn't understand going into it what was involved in that engineered site plan, but that engineer had to account for every drop of rain that would fall on that property and where the rain went, and you had to contain it within your space. Well, a structural plan for a building is the same way. It has to be able to show that you followed what's called a load path from any direction that wind or snow or seismic forces touch that building, and how those forces get transferred through the members down to the ground, because the ground is static. It doesn't move unless you have an earthquake, but you can account for that. But those loads have to be transferred to the ground. You just can't have a piece that ends somewhere without load being transferred out, because that load exists. So an engineer that is worth his or her salt, they've got, in our case, I mean, we designed our own proprietary program for it because we couldn't buy one that would do all those things. But there's a lot of work involved in that, and your building is only going to be as strong as that weakest point. I had a client in Walla Walla, Washington several years ago, and he had this idea. He had to have, Walla Walla has very little snow, had to have 2x8 roof purlins on his building because he was convinced that that's what it was going to take to carry the load. I said, okay, those 2x8 purlins, that's great. So what happens when the rest of your building falls apart underneath those purlins? Did it really make a difference? No, it really didn't. So, I mean, from an engineering standpoint, people don't understand that, first of all, if you're in a jurisdiction that requires a permit, which it blew me away when I found out that there are lots of places that don't. I came from the West where you got, you need a structural permit for your doghouse pretty much. Yep. I could hardly fathom that, but,
and there's a lot of places where to be a builder, you just need a business card.
Or a napkin.
Yeah. There's not even a license process. Yeah. But go ahead.
So when your jurisdiction gives you a set of loads for your building, those are the minimum requirements. That is the least that they possibly will allow. And those minimum requirements are for residential are based on a once in 50-year occurrence. They will be exceeded. That doesn't mean that, in 50 years, it might not happen at all. It could happen the year after that building is put up. And the idea behind the building codes, it's fire life safety. What's going to keep you from dying in the event of that catastrophic event? It doesn't mean that the building is necessarily even going to stand up. It just means that you'll be able to survive it. Your building may lean, 15 degrees out of plumb. The roof may have been sucked off it. One wall could be gone. But if you lived, then you met the success of the building codes. So I always encourage people, and I try to encourage our team, and I know it doesn't happen nearly enough, but look at, what's it going to cost to increase that, that snow load if you're in snow country, or the design wind speed if you're in somewhere where wind is going to be the dictate. Oftentimes it is very, very small, rather than saying, well, I think I need to have an 8x8 column, or I need my roof trusses built out of 2x12s, or whatever you have picked in there, rather than pick one thing that may or may not influence it, is go for that total package that assures you that all the connections and all the components are engineered adequately to meet a given set of wind or snow or seismic circumstances, whatever it may be. So, but there's a lot involved in this, and people they do not, for the most part, grasp it, and builders even less grasp it. Yep. I've run across builders that they'll tell me, my daddy built them this way, and we've built them this way, and we've been doing it for 40 years, and we're just going to keep on doing it that way. Well, that's all great and wonderful. Every 3 years, there's a new version of the building codes that comes out. And as technology improves, we're better able to understand how especially wind forces work on buildings and certain portions of buildings, and it changes. And so that guy that's been building it the same way for 40 years, unless they just overkilled it to beat the band 40 years ago, they're in trouble. Yeah. And some of this, I'll go back to the Southern Yellow Pine thing.
Careful, bro. You're done here in Southern Yellow Pine country.
I for some things, I buy Southern Yellow Pine. It has its place, but Southern Yellow Pine, because so much of it is plantation grown lumber, where you have a 2x6 with 4 growth rings and 5.5 inches, and you can harvest trees in 15-20 years and run them to the sawmill and hack them into 2x4s and 2x6s. That's the reality of it. Well, probably a dozen or so years ago, they changed the design values for Southern Yellow Pine lumber. They went down. Well, it's because you've got all this fast-grown wood. And they didn't just pluck these things from the air. They took and they do this for every species of lumber, not just Southern Yellow Pine, and they destructively test them to come up with, these are the design values that we can safely work within. So that builder, I've been using X grade, X size Southern Yellow Pine for the last 40 years. They ignored that. Oh, there were some changes. Now I'm gonna stand on the soapbox here for a moment about
Take the soapbox.
About machine stress rated lumber. Back in the 90s, I spent 6 terms on the board of directors for the Machine Stress Rated Lumber Producers Council. There are 11 board members. 9 of them were from mills, and 2 of them were from the real world. And I was one of the 2 real world people. And I was a presenter at their conference here a few weeks ago in Charlotte. And we have the technology in our country to machine test every stick of wood, especially 2-inch pieces of wood. And we then know exactly how strong that piece is within a very small coefficient of variability. That machine, it doesn't have a hot date Friday night. So, I'm just stamping away as those boards come by me on the chain, and I'm thinking this is going to be a good date. I'm making lots of select structural lumber today. It doesn't come in hungover on Monday morning, and the machine doesn't get pissed off at the boss and decide, well, I'm just going to randomly put whatever I want on it. And so for visually rated lumber, there is a tremendous degree of variability involved in it. And just because a piece may not look as beautiful as you think it is, or maybe it looks incredibly lovely, doesn't necessarily translate to the exact strength of that piece of wood. So, that's my soapbox for machine stress rated lumber.
Well, as everything that you do, I appreciate it greatly, man. And I appreciate you for coming out here and doing this podcast with me, man, because for me, it's always about who lifts the industry up, and like I love surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me and understand everything. And so from a building science perspective, from an engineering perspective, like the history behind it and how it all started, like, it's an honor, man, to get on here and talk with you. And again, for us, it's finding the best solution so that people can have the outcome that they hope for. And so even outside of just build with the Barndo Co., there's people out there that want to do it themselves, and there's people out there that want a different solution. And I would highly recommend your company and send them your way to have that conversation and see what that would look like for them. You guys do a great job, and you ship everywhere, and you post pictures down the road from me all the time, and I'm like, yeah, here he is. It's awesome. So I always appreciate your insight, man.
Well, and you guys seriously, you do a great job because you care, and I understand that you care. And one of my mantras personally has always been, it's all about the building, and if you take care of the building, then everybody wins. And the contractor makes money, the subs make money, the suppliers make money, the client who purchased that home, they have a building that they know is going to be structurally sound. It's going to meet their needs. They're going to love it forever. They're not going to have a ton of maintenance because somebody was shoddy along the way, because you guys cared. You took care of the building.
Yeah, man. Well, I like that you have a like mind, and we're here for the building, and the consumer, and try to protect the industry as best we can. So, man, it was great to share a couple hours with you and share all this information with people.
It went by way too fast, so we're gonna have to do more of these.
All right, for sure, man. I appreciate you.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in to the Barndo Show podcast. If you're watching on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this content, hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and then be sure to check us out on all of our social media platforms at the Barndo Co. Super simple to find us. And then when you're ready to dive in a little more, maybe look around some of our available floor plan options, or take a look at the gallery of our work, or maybe you're ready to connect with our team and explore what it looks like to build your dream barndominium, you can visit us online at thebarndoco.com.